10 R-rated 80s action movies nobody dares to recommend. Whenever there's a discussion on top R-rated action movies from the 80s, everyone talks about Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, RoboCop, and Terminator. But the 80s was a decade that produced much more than these gems, and some of them just went under, not talked about, because maybe some did not qualify as pure action movies and others did not have enough budget to make them a visual spectacle or cast a big-ass actor. But still, movies like Dead Heat, The Exterminator, and many such deserve much more praise and recognition, and that's exactly why I came up with this title, 10 R-rated 80s action movies nobody dares to recommend. So without further ado, let's begin. Dead Heat, 1988. See, there are some movies where you do not focus on the flaws, because if you do that, you'd be depriving yourself of a lot of fun. And Dead Heat from 1988 is clearly one of those movies. And the simplest reason behind this is that this movie is a bad little cocktail of buddy cop action, zombie comedy, dark humor, and of course, the good old so bad it's good vibe. The movie follows LAPD detectives Roger Mortis, played by Treat Williams, and Doug Bigelow, played by Joe Piscopo, as they die with violent criminals who somehow just don't die, and their case eventually leads them to a strange pharmaceutical company. Then Roger is killed and his coroner girlfriend, along with his loose cannon partner, find the company's resurrection machine. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens. Let's not get into the why of things here. The machine then brings Roger back as an undead cop, which only means that he now has to solve his own murder before his body falls apart in the next 12 hours. Most detectives had a deadline. Here, Roger was dead. And of course, the movie just gets into the totally insane territory, but that's a good thing, and the only reason why you should absolutely go for this one. Look, how many movies do you know where you get dialogues like, "Sorry to interrupt your erection," or scenes like this one? Roger and Doug deal with zombie hitmen, a butcher shop that goes berserk, and a dead industrialist played by Vincent Price in one of his final film roles. As a movie, Dead Heat had a very, very Reanimator-like feel to it, and since it's a buddy cop film, that whole trope becomes all the more fun. And I really can't stress enough on just how awesome the dialogue of the movie was, complete with crude dead cop jokes and shamelessly goofy confidence. The acting is bad, really bad. Sure, but after a point, you won't even care about that. Watch it for Vincent Price, the gore, and the dark humor.
How did you find me?
You left an angry partner for dead on Altair.
The Hidden, 1987. The Hidden is mostly a sci-fi horror movie, but it walks like a thriller, talks like a thriller, and somehow, it's got more brains than a thriller. The film starts with Jack DeVries, a violent criminal, robbing a Wells Fargo bank with a shotgun before escaping in a black sports car. With rock music blasting in the background, the car tears through Los Angeles, and Jack unleashes absolute havoc before a police roadblock finally stops him. And we learn that Jack was responsible for some 12 deaths, 6 robberies, 23 injuries, and several car thefts. So yes, no one was exactly praying for his recovery. Then FBI agent Lloyd Gallagher comes to Los Angeles from Seattle and goes straight to Sergeant Thomas Beck. Gallagher wanted details on DeVries, cause he knew something was off, and of course he was right. Despite being heavily injured, DeVries wakes up and passes a massive insect-like alien into Jonathan P. Miller's mouth, and from here on, the film really begins. The creature transfers from host to host and uses human bodies like cheap rental cars. It steals whatever it wants, especially Porsches and Ferraris. I mean, I am not sure why, but it had a thing for expensive cars. Later on, several law-abiding citizens and one sold-out stripper commit innumerable murders and robberies. Directed by Jack Shoulder, the man who also made the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie, all those car chases and shootouts in the film worked very well. But what's really fascinating is just how seriously everyone treated this rather insane story. You'll find that Kyle MacLachlan's Gallagher is a strange young agent with almost no social quotient, while Michael Norrie's Beck is the older detective type, stuck between some very natural and logical disbelief and a sense of duty. And although this is essentially a buddy cop story, it is not the run-of-the-mill kind, which makes their partnership interesting. Add the rock-heavy score, the dark humor, and absolutely obnoxious but somewhat common alien slug premise, and The Hidden becomes a rare B-movie gem, and quite possibly the best movie ever made about a homicidal alien slug that oozes from human host to human host, proving that if you have enough all-round resourcefulness, imagination, and craft, you can easily transcend the budgetary constraints that B-movies often face.
I got nothing left but payback. You mess with me and you're dead meat.
Surf Nazis Must Die, 1987. Now, the title of Surf Nazis Must Die should itself tell you that the film did not bother itself with petty concepts like dignity or basic restraint, and believe it or not, its distributor, Troma Entertainment, launched a very dedicated ad campaign to have the film nominated for that year's Oscar in the Best Picture category. The story begins after an earthquake wrecked the California coastline and left the beaches in total anarchy. So there was obviously a power vacuum, and to fill it in came a group of neo-Nazis led by a man called Adolf, who basically declared himself the new Beach Führer. Next, this guy and his beach version of the Reich are fighting rival surfer gangs and seizing control of the coast. Needless to say, the film answers what would happen if a post-apocalyptic beach movie lost its mind, but did we ask the question? Did we? Anyway, this wasn't even the strangest part of the movie. That part was Gail Neely's Mama Washington, the mother of Leroy, an African-American oil well worker who was killed by these surf Nazis while he was out for a jog on the beach. Now, Mama Washington was obviously crushed by his death, but instead of mourning, Mama Washington became a gun-wielding assassin who also armed herself with grenades and a lot of sass. After breaking out of her retirement home, she goes after the gang herself. Troma Entertainment had already built its name pretty much through no-budget splatter, bad taste, and extremely cringe and campy madness through films like Class of Nukem High, The Toxic Avenger, Chopper Chicks in Zombie Town, and later Poultrygeist, Night of the Chicken Dead. But somehow Surf Nazis Must Die turned out to be better in cinematic quality, but of course it is no masterclass in filmmaking. With a poster that promised you the same feel and action as Mad Max 2, albeit on the beachfront, Beach Nazis does offer you a good 80 minutes of mind-boggling, if not mind-blowing action. The plot is, of course, very easy to forget, but the same can't be said about the movie overall, because whenever the pace starts to sag, you get one more decapitation, one more head blown apart, and yes, a great deal of gore. If nothing else, watch it for the love scene with that trumpet score in the background. The Prowler, 1981. Unlike most slasher movies, The Prowler tells the story of a soldier who had been cheated and whose unhealed wound just pushed him over the edge. In 1945, an American GI returned from World War II service and expected to come home to Avalon Bay, New Jersey, where he thought his love of life, his Rosemary, would still be waiting for him. But instead, the girl sent him a Dear John letter and told him she could not wait any longer. For the uninitiated, Dear Johns are letters that the women of servicemen sent to their husbands and boyfriends who were away on long tours, such as the World War or the Vietnam War. Since John was a very common name, the letters came to be known as Dear John. Anyway, the rejection that our GI faced turned him into a human exterminator, a ruthless killer. On the night of the graduation dance, he murdered Rosemary and her new boyfriend with a pitchfork. After that, Avalon Bay stopped the graduation dance for more than 35 years. But eventually, the town decided enough time had passed and the younger crowd deserved that old tradition back. Of course, some locals feared that the return of the dance would also bring the killer back, because in horror towns this kind of shit often happened, and needless to say, they were right. The killer returned in his old army uniform and began to target the young people of Avalon Bay. Sheriff Frazier was away on vacation, so Deputy Mark London had to deal with the Prowler, and to make things worse, Mark's girlfriend, Pam, was among the graduates present at the dance. So the whole film basically turned into a race against time. Can Mark stop or uncover the Prowler before Pam becomes yet another victim? I think the murder scenes are really where the Prowler shines as a movie, like some of them were just too realistic. Early on, a guy named Carl came to his girlfriend's place, and as soon as he caught his breath in the bedroom, the Prowler came up behind him, held his head, and drove a long knife through his skull until it came out below his chin. And this is just one of the awesome kills. The Prowler's director, Joseph Zito, who later directed Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, ensured that the film had the usual solid slasher suspense. The scene where Pam did not realize she shared a room with the Prowler was especially thrilling, but you gotta watch it to feel it. And of course, a lot of the credit must go to Tom Savini's effects, who took the movie from good to almost great. After his work with George Romero and Maniac, he brought that same effective and horrifying skill here and made the gore so intense that to this day, first-time watchers find it extreme. In fact, I am surprised that the censor board did not make as many cuts as one would have thought. Next we have Mad Max 2, aka The Road Warrior, 1981. So of course this one was a sequel to the OG Mad Max film starring Mel Gibson, and although it was set in the same world as the first one, this one was way more about the wasteland setting. After civilization collapsed because of global war, oil became extremely scarce and may be more valuable than treasure, and the people who survived turned to barbarism because that was the new world order. Amidst these circumstances, Max Rokitansky, an ex-cop, had already lost his family and friends to a biker gang, and when the movie starts, Max is all alone and barely making it through life. He scavenged through the Australian wilderness for food and petrol, with only his Australian cattle dog for company. Soon Max came face to face with Wes and his gang, but managed to drive them off before stealing their petrol. After that, he noticed a gyrocopter and tried to take its fuel, but the pilot stopped him and told him about an oil refinery. Max spared him and together they reached the refinery, but the Marauders were also after the refinery, and Wes was also a member of this Marauders gang, whose leader was Lord Humongous. Now, Max saw his chance when some settlers tried to escape the compound, and he even tried to save one of the injured settlers, but the man later died, and as for the rest, well, they did not quite trust him initially, so much so that they nearly killed him. But the Marauders returned before that could happen. Humongous offered the settlers safe passage in return for a steady fuel supply, but Max made his own deal with them and promised to recover their fuel tanker. After some pretty good high-octane action sequences, Max managed to keep his promise, yet when the settlers asked him to come along, he instead just asked for his share of fuel and planned to leave alone. But the thing is, Wes and his companion badly hurt Max, and they even kill his dog before leaving him for dead. But the movie does not end here, and the last act of The Road Warrior is just one of the greatest in the history of post-apocalyptic movies. Director George Miller took the violent energy of the first Mad Max and made it even bigger, deadlier, and yes, more mythic. In this one, Max is like truly broken, and because he's the sum of his experiences, like the loss of his wife and child, among other things, you can start to feel sympathetic towards him and feel sad for just how lonely he is. Interestingly, the famous stunt where a biker flew over a hood and toward the camera, well, while shooting that scene, the stuntman lost control, broke his leg, and almost died. But the shot turned out so good that Miller decided to, in fact, keep it in the movie. The Burning, 1981. At Camp Blackfoot, 5 teenage boys target a man named Cropsey, who used to be the camp's very hated caretaker. Now, Cropsey was not Mr. Goody Two-Shoes either. He was a sadistic, drunk person, and that's pretty much why he shouldn't have been messed with, especially not for fun. The grand idea of these teenage boys was to sneak into his shack at night and place a human skull full of worms beside his bunk, with candles set in the eye sockets. Now, as pranks went, this couldn't be classified as harmless fun, but it did fall into the category of a crime. Of course, everything went wrong, so Cropsey wakes up, and because he wasn't aware of it, he knocks the skull into his bed and his leg catches fire. And because of some gasoline in the room, his entire body catches fire, but he somehow survives and spends the next 5 years at St. Catherine's Hospital with skin grafts. Released from the hospital soon after, he was sent back into the world and was told not to blame anyone or give in to revenge. Needless to say, he ignored the advice and began his revenge spree by taking care of a hooker in her own apartment with a pair of giant scissors. We now move to Camp Stonewater, where a fresh batch of campers become Cropsey's next targets of his brutal revenge spree. The boys included Todd, Eddie, a bully named Glazer, another lonely kid named Alfred, the outgoing Dave, and lastly, Woodstock, while Michelle was the de facto leader of the girls, Karen, Sally, and Tiger. Unlike many slashers which do not really care about establishing backstories or building a connection between the audience and the victims, The Burning spent quite some time on these kids, or maybe a little too much time, because all of this took about 50 minutes of the film before Cropsey killed one of them. For a slasher, that kind of feels like a long road. A very long road to the good stuff. But the supposed 3-day canoe trip to Devil's Creek becomes a hellish adventure for the kids, as Cropsey is now armed with larger shears and the deaths become progressively brutal. Once again, Tom Savini's gore effects help elevate the standard of the film, and we get much better shots from the point of view of the killer. Interestingly, the disgraced producer Harvey Weinstein not only produced the movie, but also wrote its story.
No?
The Exterminator, 1980. The Exterminator is the direct result of the late 70s and early 80s revenge film wave that Death Wish from 1974 had birthed. But the thing is, the films that followed Death Wish often had less money but plenty of violence, and you could feel the grindhouse pulse in their veins. Around that same period, we had Death Wish 2, Vigilante, Rolling Thunder, Class of 1984, among others, and then this one, The Exterminator, which might have been the dirtiest and nastiest of the lot. But I don't say that as an insult. And yeah, this is one of the first movies that focused on the horrors of the Vietnam War and the PTSD attached to it. The film opens in Vietnam and we see John Eastland, played by Robert Ginty, captured by the enemy. But after one very brutal beheading of a friend, he manages to escape with his friend, played by Steve James. Then the story jumps ahead by a few years and we open in 1980, and by now, both men have started working at a meat plant. It wasn't all roses and rainbows, but the men tried to make it through one day at a time, until one day, a gang tried to steal goods from the place, and the two vets shut them down. Of course, the gang did not really know how to deal with insults, so they return to attack, and Steve James's character is left paralyzed in the aftermath, and Eastland just snaps. He goes after the thugs first, but he does not stop with that, as he basically becomes a nighttime vigilante who cuts his way through criminals across New York and earns for himself the name The Exterminator. Maybe after Mad Max 2, this one's one of the better entries on this list. Mostly, the film continues to be bleak, dark, and dead serious throughout its runtime, and despite being categorized as a B-movie, there's hardly any campy action sequences or cringe fests. Like for instance, Eastland feeds a man to rats, burns a pervert, and one unfortunate bad guy ends up in a meat grinder. Charles Bronson from Death Wish would probably have asked this guy to calm down. That's how unhinged this vigilante was. But yeah, at no point does Robert Ginty's character feel like a superhero, and throughout he continues to be a man who's just been pushed past his limits. And no one likes what he has become, at least not the criminals of New York. If you're into revenge movies, this one's gotta be on the list.
What can I do for, Sheriff? Don't be riding Danny here tomorrow. He's after leaving this town.
Dead and Buried, 1981. A St. Louis photographer, played by Christopher Allport, reaches a coastal stretch to take photos of wildlife, old fishery gear, and beach debris. So this place was quiet and quaint, the kind of place you like when on a vacation, and also the kind of place you should ignore if you are a character in an action horror movie. Because, of course, this guy did not know that. Anyway, so he meets this blonde woman named Lisa, played by Lisa Blount, who it seems was trying to seduce him, or at least she was trying to distract him. But before he could make sense of any of it, a group of armed locals attacks and ties him to a post with a fishnet before burning him alive. And it's all made more profound and scary thanks to Joe Renzetti's calm music. The town was called Potter's Bluff, and very quickly it gets evident that this place was as quaint and calm as Derry or Hawkins. The photographer's burned body was found in his car, but he had miraculously survived. Not yet at least, and the cops think this was just an accident. Needless to say, the town of Potter's Bluff had a whole clan of murderers who preyed on visitors, drifters, and anyone unfortunate enough to pass through these cursed lands. And the reason behind all this will shock you, because the movie has one of the craziest twist endings for a rather low-budget movie. But yeah, most surprisingly, Dan O'Bannon co-wrote the screenplay for Dead and Buried with Ronald Shusett. And these are the same men who wrote the story for the first ever Alien movie, yeah, the 1979 one. Naturally, Dead and Buried's quality increases simply because of these two. And if that's not enough, we got Robert Englund, who plays a small role of a tow truck driver. And I don't know if it was the involvement of Dan O'Bannon and Shusett or the craft of director Gary Sherman, but the movie's greatest strength is its grim atmosphere. And then there's the story, of course. The movie pretty much feels like a story from folk horror where an entire town has been cursed, but it also has shades of other good movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and the Stepford Wives. Naturally, you also get a lot of paranoia and claustrophobia, etc. Lately, the cherry on the cake has to be Stan Winston's makeup effects, who brought his unparalleled skills to Dead and Buried. Wanted, Dead or Alive, 1986. Nick Randall, a Los Angeles bounty hunter and former CIA operative, is asked by an old co-worker to help track down Malik al-Rahim. Malik had bombed a movie theater, and later he planned to release gas from a chemical plant similar to the Bhopal gas tragedy from India, which killed around 20,000 people when methyl isocyanate leaked from a plant. If you are interested in foreign language stuff, you can totally watch The Railwaymen, which details the story of how some Indian railway staff became the first responders to the tragedy. Of course, Nick Randall gets involved and the plot goes beyond the usual cat and mouse chase and into the territory of a revenge drama. But I will have to say that although Gene Simmons as Malik could have been an epic villain, the performance was ultimately a missed opportunity. It felt like the film knew his limits and kept him without any dialogue for long periods of the movie. Maybe because the accent and the acting were both risky territory. His first scene was strong though. He planted a bomb in a theater where Rambo was doing his thing, and when one of his bomb men bragged about a detonator that worked from 2 miles away, Malik was all about getting close enough to ground zero to watch. Then he walked out and touched a child's face before the blast killed 144 people. The second act lost some of its force because Malik disappeared like way too much, and maybe spending so much time on character building and a police corruption subplot was not really necessary. Having said all that, the film's view of Middle Eastern terrorists was ugly and very 80s, in the sense that the stereotype of Muslim guys was just too extreme, and the villains were written as pure sadists who blew up civilians, babies, and even their own people. If these guys were not terrorists, they would have become terrorists after seeing this sort of an obnoxious portrayal. But I am still recommending it because it is a good action movie at the end, and people are scared to recommend it because of how controversial it sometimes gets. Death Ship, 1980. Death Ship is basically the love child produced after angry sex between a haunted house story and a Nazi maritime story. Captain Ashland, played by George Kennedy, was strict, precise, and about as warm as a locked steel door. In 3 days, he was meant to lose command of his luxury cruise liner, and because of just who he was and how he was, no one was sad about it. Like, the man ruled like a tyrant, and even at a costume party with his first mate, Trevor Marshall, played by Richard Crenna, he felt out of place. But there had to be a mishap, and there was one. Then the voyage goes wrong, and strange unseen forces pull the cruise liner into the path of another vessel. The crew tried to change course, but the ship was rammed by what seemed to be a derelict craft. The result was heavy damage, deaths, and a small group of survivors stuck on a lifeboat. Marshall, his family, and a few others managed to board the abandoned iron ship. And from that moment on, shit really starts to fall from the fan for them all. Unlike most horror movies that use darkness to hide their flaws, Death Ship takes place in bright daylight, and yet the thin corridors still feel extremely tense. Marshall tries to explain the odd events as old machinery and old ship trouble, but that couldn't really do much of the explaining. And you know what? The only other flaw is the film does have very typical horror movie traits and tropes, like everything from children wandering off to lovers acting foolish, and a few scenes telegraph themselves too early. Still, the grim mood, Ivor Slaney's eerie score, and that sea-bound haunted house trope make the movie worth your time. So yeah, that was all in this one, guys. If you liked the video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these awesome videos. Stay safe, and have a good one.